Flood version 4.2 is now released. In this video, we're going to take a look at the key changes that have been made and see them in the context of an example to-do app. If this is your first time hearing about Flood or you want to learn more about it, visit flooddev.com to learn more. You'll find a link in the description below as well. The first change is dynamic styling. Now we can use the style module to automatically change the style during runtime. For example, we can switch between light and dark mode with the click of a button. You can also add your own custom styles, such as high contrast or colorblind modes. Let's look at a quick example. I've opened up the Flood repositories example project over here, and I've implemented style switching inside of the app. So if we take a look here, we're going to see that whenever we press this button, it's going to change the style of the app. And the cool thing as well is that it's going to actually save this preference to your local storage. So if I've set this to light mode and I restart the app, whenever it relaunches, it's going to reopen in light mode. And same thing, if I switch it to dark mode, it's going to save that preference and then open it up into dark mode the next time I open up the app. Let's see how this works. Inside of main.dart, whenever we register the Flood app component, we define the style that we want to use during the splash screen. In this case, we're going to use the dark style, which is a flat style that has a dark background color. Take notice as well that we have a light style defined here. That is the same thing as the dark style, it just has a light background color. Now, whenever we're loading the app component inside of the splash screen, we're going to figure out which style we should actually use for the rest of the app. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to fetch the singleton of the local settings entity, which what this is going to do is it's going to fetch the only local settings entity, and if this does not exist, it's going to create a local settings entity for us. And then using that local settings, we're going to extract the theme from that and then use the theme's style. So let's take a look at how this works. The local settings entity is a wrapper for this local settings value object, which all this is, it just has a property that is an int, and it's mapped to this enum called theme mode, which we have set as light or dark. And so if the value of this property is equal to 0, it's going to be mapped to theme mode.light, and if it's 1, it's going to be mapped to dark. And this local settings, it's only stored on the device. It's not going to be ever stored on the cloud. And the way that this works is if we take a look at the repository for this, we're going to see that this is a regular repository, except it's instead of adapting, it is adapting to device, which means that if we're in the testing environment, it's going to use the memory repository. It's going to save everything to memory. And if we're in the device environment or anything else, such as production or staging, it's only going to save to the device, not to the cloud. So that way we can ensure that these local settings stay local. And then if we take a look here back at main.dart, whenever we fetch the local settings theme, we then call .style on it, which this is an extension on theme mode, so that if we're ever in the light enum here, we're going to use the light style that we defined earlier. Otherwise, we're going to use the dark style. Let's go ahead and take a look at how this button here that changes the style actually works. In the home page, we have inside of our styled page here in our action widgets, a style switcher widget. If we click into this, we're going to see that this is quite simple. All it's doing is it's listening to the singleton from the local settings entity, and then we're going to build that local settings entity over here. And if the local settings theme is dark mode, we're going to show this style button over here. That's going to change the style of the app to light mode. And the way that you change the style is by calling context.style app component.style is equal to your style. So we're going to change it to the light style, and then we're going to update the local settings to reflect this so that the next time they open up the app, they're going to have a light mode enabled. And then same thing, vice versa, to change this into dark style, like this. The nice thing with the style system here is that it's not limited to just light mode and dark mode. You can change this to whatever type of styles you want. You can add high contrast, or you can do colorblind mode, or a variety of other types of styles. As long as you set the context.style app component.style equal to your style, it's going to work. The next feature we want to take a look at is smart text input with suggestions. Now, you can easily add suggestions to style text fields and to ports and to value object fields so that as you're typing, you can get suggestions suggested to users that they can click on. Not only that, but you can also asynchronously load suggestions based on the current text value, and then you can also customize the behavior of what happens when a user clicks on a suggestion. Let's take a look at the code. Here, we've got a test search page that is simply a styled page with a centered styled text field. And in here, it has a label of state. And if we click into this, we're going to see some suggestions being shown to us. We can start typing some letters such as AL, and we're going to see that some suggestions are going to be loaded based on the text that we've typed in. So we can easily find Alabama or maybe New York, like so. How does this work? What we've got here is a suggestions getter in the style text field, which, given the current text, we're going to find the USA states over here, which is just a list of states, and we're going to find all the states such that they contain the text to lowercase. And that's all we're showing. You can see that there's a lot of customization options here as well. By default, there is a debounce of 400 milliseconds as you type, which is this loading spinner you're seeing as you're changing the text. But you can go ahead and change it to be duration.0. And if we reload this and we restart the app here, we're going to see that our changes are shown instantly instead of needing this loading spinner to show for a bit. We can also change the builder that is used for each suggestion. So in this case, instead of just using the default style text over here, we want to make it so that the suggestions are small text, which you can see over here. And lastly, you can change what happens whenever you press on a suggestion by setting on suggestion pressed, which this here is going to be the suggestion that we pressed, and here is the text editing controller that we can manipulate. In this case, we're going to want to set the text of the controller equal to the suggestion we just pressed, but we also want to print state selected. So if we go ahead and we open up our logs over here and we click on New Jersey, we're going to see state selected New Jersey over here. By default, whenever you click on a selection and if you have not overridden on suggestion pressed, it's simply going to change the text editing controller's text to the suggestion that you pressed. The other nice thing is that you can make the suggestions getter asynchronous. So in this case, we're going to await a second before we actually collect the results. So if we start typing something like TE, we're going to see that it takes a second before the results show up. As a result, this allows you to use any type of asynchronous service or resource that you want to fetch suggestions. Here's an example of how I use the suggestion system in a client's project to implement Mapbox address suggestions. As you start typing over here, it's going to use your current address and call Mapbox asynchronously to fetch a list of probable addresses that you might mean. And so if we click on one of these suggestions, it's going to select that full address into the text bar, and you can see how the builder over here, it's going to nicely display in bold just the address itself, and then underneath in smaller text, it's going to display the city, state, and the country. Another place that you can use suggestions in your code is as part of value object fields. So in this case, the user has a state property, which is just a string, and then we also have some suggestions over here. Given the current value of the text, we're going to once again filter the USA states based on the current value. If we take a look at this in action, if you go over here and you edit your profile, this is going to automatically generate the form to edit the user. And we can see the state text field over here is going to use this suggestions getter over here to fetch the suggestions for us. And so we can start typing, and if we wanted to use New Hampshire, we can just type in new, click OK, and that's going to be what is saved to our user. The next feature is streamlined entity references. Currently, whenever you have a reference in a value object and then you use the styled object port builder, it's going to give you a dropdown that you can use to find an entity to link to. Before, it was quite difficult to find the exact entity you wanted whenever there was a lot of entities to choose from and there was no order to it. But now we've added a search functionality that you can click on the search box and then you can type in the result that you want and filter the resulting entities based on that. Here's how easy it is to implement this in the code. In our to-do value object, we've added a new reference for a linked to-do entity. And here we've defined the search query to be any to-do entity whose user is equal to the currently logged in user. And this is all we have to do. There's no customization we need to do here. Now, whenever you create a new to-do or you edit one, you get the search box that we looked at earlier, but if this is too complex to look at, you can click on this search and you can start typing. Maybe I want number 19. I type it in, I click here, and that is the one that's going to be linked. The next feature is optimized asset management. Now, with just a simple .with compression, you can automatically compress all the images and videos that users upload to your app to save a lot on bandwidth and time. So for example, in the default iOS simulator, you've got this image that's 1.9 megabytes. Once it's compressed using the .with compression, it's going to compress it down to only 126 kilobytes, which is removing about 90% of the data in here. And all you've got to do is, inside of the example, I've got this helper here that I can just call assetprovider.with compression, and then it's going to automatically take care of everything on its own. For now, there's currently preset defaults for how much it compresses things. Let me know down in the comments if you want more flexibility for this. The next feature is Firebase Functions types integration, where now with just running one CLI command, you can scan all of your repositories and your value objects to automatically generate types for them for your Firebase functions. Let's take a look at an example. All we have to do is go into our core project's automate.dart file and add this line over here. Add the Firebase drop automate component. And then when you run dart tool/automate.dart drop functions, it's going to automatically generate this drop.ts file over here, which is going to be in your Firebase functions source directory. And here, for example, in my todo.dart, I've added a linked property here with the linked to-do item. And here has the name of linked. And so whenever we run this over here, we're going to see that inside of my to-do, we're going to have, once it finishes loading over here, it now has the new linked field. And so now within my index.ts or any other TypeScript files here, I can use these namespaces to make sure I got type safety on my fields. And there's a few more small changes as well. You can now effortlessly manage singleton entities in your app. There is a new query.getSingleton, which allows you to fetch a singleton from within your database. There's now internal support for Flutter 3.24. And then there's a few bug fixes related to Flutter Web and the offline sync module. You can find more information about this version release in the link in the description below. That's going to take you to the documentation site. And as always, make sure you leave any comments if you have any questions or suggestions.